On the evening of 11 August 1492, the bells of Rome shook the city as news spread that Cardinal Rodrigo Borgia had been elected Pope Alexander VI, a moment that would mark the beginning of one of the most controversial eras in Vatican history. The streets erupted in chaotic celebration mixed with fear, because everyone in Rome knew exactly what this election meant. It was not the triumph of holiness or spiritual guidance. It was the victory of a political mastermind whose family dynasty, the Borgias, had already earned a shadowy reputation for intrigue, ambition, and ruthlessness. Among those transformed overnight by this election was his young daughter, Lucrezia Borgia, barely 12 years old, who suddenly found herself standing at the crossroads of power, scandal, and manipulation. Her life would become the center of some of the most shocking rumors ever associated with the Vatican. The Rome Lucrezia inherited was not a city of saints, far from it. The late 15th century Vatican pulsed with corruption, rivalries, and the struggle for territory. Noble families like the Colonna, Orsini, and Sforza fought bitterly for control, often hiring mercenaries to settle disputes that papal authority could no longer contain. Simony was rampant. Bishops purchased their positions like merchants buying spice. The papacy itself was deeply politicized, functioning at times like a royal court instead of a spiritual institution. It was in this unstable climate that the Borgia family rose to prominence, using strategy, diplomacy, wealth, and occasionally poison to secure power. Rodrigo Borgia was not the first pope to have children, but he was among the few who publicly acknowledged them and used them in political marriages to strengthen his rule. Lucrezia was born in 1480 in the city of Subiaco. From early childhood, she was raised not like a typical noblewoman, but like a diplomatic jewel carefully polished for political use. Her education was surprisingly advanced for the time. She studied Latin, poetry, philosophy, and diplomacy, and was known for grace, intelligence, and calm demeanor. Her mother, Vanosa de Catene, was one of Rodrigo Borgia's mistresses, and although she had limited involvement in Lucrezia's later life, her early years were stable compared to what awaited her after her father became pope. When Rodrigo ascended the papal throne, Lucrezia instantly became one of the most valuable women in Europe. Within months, negotiations began to arrange her first marriage, but behind the diplomatic facade, the Vatican was transforming. Rodrigo Borgia used his new position to enrich his family, appointing his sons to powerful positions. Cesare Borgia, Lucrezia's older brother, became the most feared figure in Italy. Cesare possessed charisma, ambition, military talent, and a ruthless streak that made him infamous. Contemporary chroniclers often described him as both brilliant and terrifying. His rise had a direct impact on Lucrezia's fate, because many of the political decisions surrounding her marriages were engineered to support Cesare's goals. Historians agree that the tales accusing Lucrezia of turning the Vatican into a brothel were exaggerated by her family's enemies, but it is equally true that the atmosphere around the Borgia court often resembled a secular palace more than a holy institution. Lavish feasts, theatrical performances, and diplomatic gatherings filled the apostolic palace. The Pope held family dinners, gatherings of nobles, and celebrations that shocked observers from Northern Europe, who still believed the Vatican to be a sanctuary of solemnity. These events fueled rumors, and in an age when political propaganda was common, the Borgias became easy targets. Their Spanish heritage made them foreigners in Italian eyes, further intensifying hostility. The earliest major scandal tied to Lucrezia began in 1493, when she was married to Giovanni Sforza, a nobleman from Milan. The marriage was arranged purely for political alignment. At first, observers described Lucrezia as dutiful and elegant, fulfilling her role without controversy. But when the political value of the alliance diminished, Pope Alexander VI decided the marriage was no longer useful. He pressured Giovanni Sforza to consent to an annulment. Fearing for his life, Giovanni fled Rome, and it was during this tense period that he made the accusation that would stain Lucrezia's name for centuries. He claimed that the annulment was demanded so she could engage in immoral relations with her father and brother. This claim was almost certainly false and politically motivated, but in the world of Renaissance Italy, scandal travelled faster than truth. The rival families leapt at the opportunity. Pamphlets, letters, and whispered stories circulated across Europe, describing the Vatican as a place of sin rather than sanctity. These stories depicted Lucrezia as the central figure of a corrupt household, a woman surrounded by men whose ambitions overshadowed morality. Because the Borgias were already infamous for political maneuvers and ruthless tactics, the rumors found fertile ground. Yet Lucrezia's life was far more tragic and complicated than the accusations suggested. She had little control over her marriages, which were arranged to strengthen the political ambitions of her father and brothers. After the annulment of her marriage to Sforza, she was again prepared for a new alliance. But during this period, a mysterious development occurred. Chroniclers note that while awaiting her next marriage, Lucrezia spent several months away from public view. Soon after, an infant boy named Infans Romanus appeared in the Vatican. Rumors erupted that the child was hers, but the identity of the father was never confirmed. Some sources even claimed the baby belonged to Pope Alexander VI or Cessair, though modern historians reject these claims as politically motivated defamation. Most credible research suggests the child may have been born from an affair between Lucrezia and a member of the Borgia court, but the truth was buried under layers of secrecy and rumor, leaving historians to speculate. To strengthen Borgia influence, Lucrezia was married again in 1498, this time to Alfonso of Aragon, the illegitimate son of the King of Naples. This marriage tied the Borgias to one of the most powerful dynasties in southern Italy. But it also set the stage for tragedy. Cessair Borgia, seeking to build alliances with France, began to view the Aragonese family as a political threat. Alfonso sensed the danger and tried to maintain distance from Cessair. Yet in the ruthless game of Italian power politics, such caution was often useless. One night in 1500, Alfonso was attacked near St. Peter's Basilica by unknown assailants. Although he survived the initial attack, he was later strangled to death in the Vatican. Many historians believe Cessair ordered the killing to eliminate political obstacles. Lucrezia, pregnant at the time, was devastated. Her grief, recorded by observers in Rome, paints a picture far different from the scandalous woman portrayed in rumors. The death of Alfonso marked a turning point in Lucrezia's life. It hardened her resolve and taught her the brutal reality of political life under the Borgia name. Yet it also intensified the rumors surrounding her. Critics claimed she was present at feasts that resembled immoral gatherings. One notorious event that added to these accusations was the infamous banquet of chestnuts, a party held in the Apostolic Palace and described in detail by the papal master of ceremonies, Johann Burchard. According to his diary, the banquet involved entertainers and courtesans, and its scandalous nature became legendary. While Lucrezia's involvement remains debated, enemies of the Borgias used the event to argue that she had turned the Vatican into a place of moral decay. These rumors, whether true or not, created the narrative that Lucrezia was at the center of a Vatican scandal that blurred the boundaries between political ambition and private decadence. Yet modern historians argue that the image of her as a corrupt, manipulative figure was largely built by political enemies and writers of later centuries seeking dramatic stories. Still, the environment of the Vatican during Alexander VI papacy was undeniably tumultuous. Power shifted rapidly, alliances were temporary, and the boundaries between church and politics were almost non-existent. Lucrezia Borgia became both a tool and a symbol, used by great powers to justify their ambitions or criticize their enemies. And, as the scandals grew, So did the legend of the Pope's daughter, who allegedly turned the Vatican into a place of decadence. This was only the first chapter of her story, a life that would continue to evolve as she moved from Rome to Ferrara, transforming from a political pawn into one of the most admired duchesses of the Renaissance. When the year 1501 opened, Rome felt like a city standing at the edge of a storm. Pope Alexander VI had been in power for nearly a decade. Cesare Borgia was carving a path of conquest through central Italy, and the Borgia name echoed through every palace, tavern, and alleyway. But in the heart of the Vatican, a new wave of rumors began to spread. Observers claimed that the private chambers of the papal family were hosting gatherings unlike anything the Holy See had seen before. Feasts, dances, diplomatic visits, and private meetings began to take on a darker shape in the imagination of their critics. At the center of these whispers stood Lucrezia Borgia, now a young woman of striking beauty and undeniable political importance, still mourning the brutal assassination of her husband Alfonso of Aragon, yet forced to operate within the dangerous arena of Vatican politics. The Vatican of this era was far from the solemn religious institution imagined by outsiders. It functioned as a political fortress, a nerve center of power, wealth, and negotiation. Foreign ambassadors, mercenary captains, priests, cardinals, and noble families constantly moved through its halls. The Borgia court developed a reputation for magnificence, filling the apostolic palace with music, flowers, tapestries, gold decorations, and elaborate ceremonies. While such displays were common among Italian nobility, the fact that they were occurring inside the Vatican made them the target of criticism. Many chroniclers from northern Italy and other European kingdoms, especially those aligned with France or the Holy Roman Empire, accused the Borgia household of blurring the boundary between papal authority and worldly pleasure. It was during this period that the story claiming Lucrezia turned the Vatican into a brothel began to take deeper root. Enemies of the family circulated letters and accounts that exaggerated or invented scandals with astonishing detail. The most famous of these allegations centered around the so-called Banquet of Chestnuts, which reportedly took place in October 1501. The event was described by Johann Burchard, the papal master of ceremonies, in his diary. According to his account, the gathering featured courtesans, feasting, dancing, and competitions designed to entertain the guests. While the authenticity and interpretation of his description are debated among historians, rival families used the story as proof that the Vatican had descended into immorality under the Borgias. However, the truth is more complicated. There is no solid evidence that Lucrezia was involved in or present at such events. She spent much of this time managing administrative tasks for her father, acting as regent in his absence, and tending to her infant son Rodrigo, named after her father. But the political environment of 15th century Italy cared little for documented truth. What mattered was influence, power, and the mastery of public narrative. The Orsini, Colonna, Della Rovere, and other rival houses saw the growing strength of the Borgia dynasty as a threat to their own ambitions. They understood that character assassination was a weapon as potent as swords or poison. Accusations of immorality were especially effective because they struck at the legitimacy of a papal family already viewed with suspicion. Still, it must be acknowledged that the Borgia papacy was not a place of strict moral discipline. Pope Alexander VI hosted diplomatic feasts filled with music, performances, and spectacles. The presence of entertainers and the close proximity of secular power created an environment ripe for gossip. The fact that the Pope openly acknowledged his children, granted them palaces, and allowed them visible roles in political affairs shocked many traditional Catholics. To critics, this signaled a corruption of the Holy Seat, making every action of the Borgia family appear suspicious. Lucrezia, as the young daughter of the Pope, became an easy target. She was blamed for events she never attended and scandals she never orchestrated. One of the most persistent rumors was that Lucrezia held influence over clerics and cardinals, manipulating positions and alliances. While she did play a role in administrative duties when her father was absent, there is little evidence she engaged in political coercion. Instead, her intelligence, education, and calm diplomatic style allowed her to navigate the complex world around her with surprising skill. She wrote letters to cities, nobles, and ambassadors, acted as mediator in disputes, and managed various affairs of the papal household. Yet, observers twisted these responsibilities into a narrative of seduction and manipulation, claiming she held private meetings with clerics behind closed doors. In the climate of Renaissance propaganda, such accusations were enough to fuel legends that would survive for centuries. The most destructive rumor, however, accused Lucrezia of incest with her father and brothers. Giovanni Sforza had made the claim during his bitter escape from Rome after his marriage to Lucrezia was annulled. His statement, likely driven by fear and political pressure, spread like wildfire. Later, when Alfonso of Aragon was assassinated within the Vatican walls, critics claimed the killing occurred due to a rivalry involving Lucrezia. These accusations, though unfounded, merged into a dark myth portraying her as a woman whose influence corrupted the holiest institution in Christendom. The truth, according to the most credible modern historians, is that Lucrezia was more victim than villain. She was trapped in an environment dominated by male ambition and used as a tool in the Borgia strategy. Yet, the scandalous stories served a purpose. They allowed opponents to undermine Pope Alexander VI and Cesare Borgia. If the world believed the Vatican had become a place of sin, then the Borgia papacy could be labeled illegitimate. In this way, Lucrezia became a symbol of decay, not because of her actions, but because of the political needs of powerful families. Renaissance Italy thrived on propaganda, and the more shocking a story appeared, the more effectively it spread. The human imagination often preferred tales of darkness over mundane political maneuvering. Writers and diplomats exaggerated every detail, transforming small events into grand tales of corruption. Despite the noise of scandal, Lucrezia's personal life during this period was filled with suffering. She mourned Alfonso deeply, raising their son without the support of her brothers, who were consumed by military campaigns. She lived under constant surveillance, surrounded by servants who reported to Cesare, cardinals who judged her every move, and ambassadors who interpreted her expressions as political signals. Her privacy was nearly non-existent. Every conversation she held behind closed doors became a source of speculation. Even her moments of grief were interpreted as manipulation or theatrical performance. Rome was a city where every noble family employed spies, and the Vatican was the center of this shadowy network. Meanwhile, Cesare Borgia's military ambition continued to grow. He conquered towns across Romagna, aiming to establish a centralized Borgia state within Italy. His success threatened powerful neighbors and fueled the urgency to cripple the Borgia reputation. Diplomatic reports from Venice, Florence, and Milan increasingly painted Lucrezia as a dangerous figure, reinforcing the idea that the Pope's daughter wielded influence over ecclesiastical decisions. These claims were often based on misinterpretations of her letters, which were formal and administrative in nature, not manipulative or immoral. But in the world of political warfare, perception mattered more than truth. By 1502, Pope Alexander VI began planning another marriage for Lucrezia, one that would move her away from Rome and reduce the political pressure surrounding her. The chosen alliance was with the ruling family of Ferrara, one of the most respected dynasties of northern Italy. At first, the Este family resisted the proposal. They feared the Borgia name would tarnish their reputation. The rumors of immorality, the accusations of scandal, and the dark tales of Vatican feasts created hesitation. but the Borgia family offered financial and political incentives too valuable to refuse. Eventually, the Este family agreed, setting the stage for a union that would drastically change Lucrezia's destiny. Before leaving Rome, she confronted perhaps the most intense wave of slander she had ever experienced. Writers claimed she was being expelled from the Vatican because her actions had corrupted the papacy. Others argued her father was desperate to remove her from Rome to diffuse scandal. None of these claims reflected the true political strategy. Her departure was a calculated move to strengthen Borgia alliances and position the family for greater territorial power. But the rumors continued to grow, embedding themselves deeply into European consciousness. Lucrezia's final months in Rome were marked by conflicting emotions. She was preparing to leave the world she had always known, a world where she was both privileged and imprisoned. She was stepping into a new life, one that offered hope but also uncertainty. The Vatican during this time was alive with tension. Caesar's enemies gathered forces, foreign ambassadors reported every detail, and the papacy's influence faced constant challenges. The rumors naming Lucrezia as the woman who turned the Vatican into a brothel reached their peak. Yet behind the curtain of drama, she remained a young woman shaped by forces far beyond her control. Her departure in early 1502 marked not only a physical journey, but the beginning of her transformation. In Ferrara, she would rebuild her reputation from the ground up, eventually becoming one of the most respected duchesses of the Italian Renaissance. But the shadow of her years in Rome would follow her forever, shaping her legacy in ways she could never escape. When January 1502 arrived, the roads leading out of Rome were cold, muddy, and lined with torches as a grand procession prepared to escort Lucrezia Borgia to Ferrara. The journey symbolized far more than a marriage alliance. It marked her departure from the city that had shaped her childhood, her sorrows, her political education, and above all, her scandalous reputation. The Vatican, where she had been accused of hosting immoral gatherings, manipulating cardinals, and corrupting the holy atmosphere, was now behind her. But the rumors that painted her as the woman who turned the papal palace into a brothel traveled ahead of her like shadows stretching across Italy. Lucrezia's marriage to Alfonso d'Este, heir to the Duchy of Ferrara and son of Duke Ercole I d'Este, was a strategic triumph for the Borgias. The Este family was one of the most respected dynasties in northern Italy, known for their refined court, artistic patronage, and political influence. To secure this marriage, Pope Alexander VI and Caesar Borgia offered generous dowries, military alliances, and territorial promises. Duke Ercole, initially reluctant due to the heavy cloud of scandal surrounding Lucrezia's name, reluctantly accepted. Reports from envoys reveal his fear that marrying Lucrezia would bring dishonor to his house, but the political advantages proved too valuable to ignore. As the bridal procession traveled north, the reactions in different Italian cities painted a vivid portrait of how deeply the Borgia reputation had penetrated public imagination. In some towns, crowds gathered out of curiosity, hoping to see the infamous woman whose name had filled tavern stories and ambassadorial letters. In others, she was greeted with respect, charm, and admiration, revealing a truth many historians highlight today. Lucrezia was loved by those who actually met her. Her grace, gentle nature, and composed manner contradicted every rumor that surrounded her. Chroniclers from Ferrara later wrote that she possessed kindness, intelligence, and a diplomatic talent unmatched by many noblewomen of her time. Her arrival in Ferrara was both triumphant and tense. The Este family had prepared for the event with elaborate ceremonies, music, and fireworks, but behind the celebration, the duchy watched closely, wondering whether the dark stories were true. Would she bring the corruption of Rome into their refined court? Would the scandals continue, or was she the innocent pawn many suspected? Alfonso d'Este himself was cautious. He had heard the same rumors as everyone else. Yet when he met Lucrezia, he was reportedly impressed by her composure, courtesy, and sincerity. Within weeks, Lucrezia began the slow process of rebuilding her reputation. Ferrara was nothing like the Vatican. There were no cardinals whispering behind curtained chambers, no foreign ambassadors spying on family dinners, no political enemies sending letters dripping with malice. Instead, Ferrara was a center of art, culture, and learning. Poets, musicians, philosophers, and scholars filled the Este Palace with creative energy. It was a court where intellect mattered as much as lineage. Lucrezia not only adapted to this environment, she thrived in it. The first step in her reinvention was proving her value as a duchess. She managed correspondences, oversaw finances, supervised noblewomen, and participated in court decisions. Her administrative skills, sharpened during her years assisting Pope Alexander VI, became an asset. The people of Ferrara quickly noticed her discipline and calm leadership. She displayed diplomatic finesse, smoothing tensions between rival nobles and acting as a stabilizing presence in the duchy. Her father-in-law, Duke Ercole, who once doubted her, soon praised her abilities. Letters from the Este household reveal his growing admiration and trust. Lucrezia's influence also extended into the realm of art and culture. She patronized poets like Ludovico Ariosto, whose later epic, Orlando Furioso, would become one of the greatest works of Italian literature. Musicians and artists found support under her care. Chroniclers wrote that her presence transformed the court into a vibrant cultural center, attracting talent from across Italy. Far from being the immoral figure used in propaganda, Lucrezia became a symbol of refinement and creativity. Despite her rising status in Ferrara, the scandals from Rome continued to echo. Rival families, especially the Della Rovere and the Orsini, still used her name as ammunition against the Borgia dynasty. As Caesar launched military campaigns to solidify control over Romagna, his enemies revived and embellished the old accusations. They claimed Lucrezia had escaped Rome because her behavior was too corrupt even for the Vatican. They exaggerated Burchard's accounts of feasts. They recycled old rumors of incest, transforming speculation into supposed fact. These stories traveled through Europe, carried by diplomats, merchants, and pamphlets. Historians today understand that this was a form of political warfare. Defamation was a powerful tool in Renaissance Italy, and women of noble birth were particularly vulnerable. Unlike men, who defended themselves on battlefields or through alliances, women were judged by reputation alone. A whispered rumor could shatter a woman's honor, regardless of truth. Lucrezia was the prime example. Her life had been shaped, distorted, and weaponized by men seeking advantage. Yet she refused to be destroyed by their narratives. While Lucrezia adjusted to life in Ferrara, the Borgia world she had left behind began to crumble. In 1503, her father Pope Alexander VI fell gravely ill. Rumors claimed poisoning, though most historians argue it was likely malaria. Caesar Borgia, too, was struck by the same illness, and their power collapsed with shocking speed. Rival families wasted no time. As soon as Alexander VI died, the Della Rovere family seized control of the papacy. Cardinal Giuliano della Rovere, who had long despised the Borgias, became Pope Julius Roman II, one of the most aggressive and anti-Borgia popes in history. He immediately dismantled Borgia influence, seized their territories, and imprisoned their allies. Lucrezia, safely in Ferrara, watched these events with a mixture of grief and caution. Her political fortune had shifted overnight. The Borgia name became even more radioactive. Diplomats whispered that she would soon be exiled or forced into a convent. Some even suggested assassins might be sent after her, but Ferrara protected her. Alfonso d'Este, though cautious early in their marriage, grew to trust and even admire her. He refused calls from political enemies to cast her aside. Her proven loyalty, efficient management, and growing popularity among the people of Ferrara shielded her from harm. Meanwhile, Caesar Borgia, once the most feared man in Italy, was reduced to a political fugitive. After escaping imprisonment, he fled to Spain, where he died in 1507 while fighting in Navarre. His fall marked the end of the Borgia dream of a dynastic kingdom in Italy. With their power shattered and their name stained by years of propaganda, the Borgia family faded from political relevance. Yet Lucrezia managed something remarkable. She survived. With Rome far behind her and her family's political empire gone, she focused on building a new identity. Ferrara became her sanctuary. As Cesare's territories were absorbed by rival powers, and as writers across Europe repeated tales of Vatican corruption, Lucrezia rewrote her legacy through action, leadership, and dignity. Her court became a model of elegance and culture. She oversaw the construction of buildings, sponsored religious works, and supported artists. She became known for her generosity toward the poor and her ability to resolve disputes calmly. Yet the rumors never fully died. Even as she raised children, managed the duchy, and earned respect, stories from her past continued to follow her. Outsiders repeated tales of immorality, orgies, incest, and manipulation. They believed she had corrupted Rome, that the Vatican had been turned into a brothel under her influence, that she had seduced powerful clerics. None of these stories appeared in official records. They existed only in the writings of enemies. But in a world without modern journalism, lies often became accepted histories. What is striking, however, is how little these accusations matched the reality of Lucrezia's life in Ferrara. She was no longer the pawn of her father or brother. She was no longer surrounded by dangerous political games. Instead, she had emerged as a respected political figure, a cultural patron, and a beloved duchess. The transformation was so dramatic that some observers who once believed the rumors later admitted they had been misled. By the time she reached her early 30s, Lucrezia Borgia had become one of the most influential women in northern Italy. Her letters reveal a woman concerned with governance, charity, and family life. She raised her children with care, educated them, and ensured they had opportunities to grow. Her correspondence with poets, nobles, and diplomats reflected wisdom and subtle political understanding. Yet she never expressed bitterness about the lies that had shaped her youth. Instead, she rebuilt her image through patience, kindness, and steady leadership. She showed Europe that a woman's character could not be defined by rumors alone. And in doing so, she created a new kind of legacy, one that would be rediscovered centuries later by historians seeking the truth behind the legend. By the time 1510 approached, Lucrezia Borgia had lived a life more dramatic than the legends written about her. She had survived political storms in Rome, escaped the collapsing Borgia Empire, endured the deaths of 2 husbands, outlived her ruthless brother Cesare, and rebuilt herself in the refined world of Ferrara. Now in her early 30s, she stood as a respected duchess, patron of the arts, devoted mother, and admired leader. Yet despite her transformation, the stories that labeled her the woman who turned the Vatican into a brothel continued to echo throughout Europe. These rumors had grown into myth, repeated endlessly by diplomats, poets, ambassadors, and later, historians who relied on biased sources. But those who lived in Ferrara recognized the truth. They knew the real Lucrezia, not the scandalous figure crafted by political enemies. Her life in Ferrara had become remarkably stable. As duchess, she joined Alfonso d'Este in attending ceremonies, hosting ambassadors, managing estates, and supporting charity. She became known for her compassion toward the poor and her diplomacy in resolving disputes. Her court blossomed into a cultural masterpiece, attracting some of the greatest minds of their time. The poet Ludovico Ariosto praised her elegance. Artists admired her taste. Scholars found support for their work. In a world dominated by rivalry and war, Lucrezia's court stood out as a haven of creativity and refinement. But even as she flourished, tragedy continued to follow her. Between 1502 and 1505, 119, Lucrezia endured the loss of several children, each death wounding her deeply. Letters from the period reveal a woman grieving privately, turning increasingly towards spirituality for comfort. She adopted a more solemn lifestyle, often visiting convents, donating to churches, and supporting young women seeking education. Her transformation from a young girl surrounded by political schemes to a mature duchess devoted to faith and family reflected her resilience. But her past would not release her so easily. While Ferrara embraced her, much of Europe still clung to the legends born in Rome. Writers repeated claims that she had engaged in incest, hosted immoral gatherings, manipulated clergy, and turned the Vatican into a den of vice. These stories were retold in courts from France to Germany, often embellished for dramatic effect. In an era without strict historical verification, such stories were accepted as truth. The Borgia name had become synonymous with corruption, and Lucrezia served as its most sensational symbol. But the more historians study credible documents, the clearer it becomes that she was a victim of political propaganda rather than a participant in moral disorder. The truth is stark. The Vatican she grew up in was unquestionably corrupt by modern standards, but not because of Lucrezia. The papacy of Alexander VI was marked by political ambition, military campaigns, nepotism, financial deals, and diplomatic intrigues. Rome itself was a place where nobility hosted extravagant feasts, where alliances shifted rapidly, where power often overshadowed religious purity. The atmosphere made it easy for opponents to paint any gathering as immoral. When combined with the fact that the Pope openly acknowledged his children, the ground was fertile for scandal. Yet none of the contemporary official records from the Vatican accuse Lucrezia of wrongdoing. Instead, the written evidence portrays her as a young woman fulfilling political duties, acting as administrator, and later proving herself a capable duchess. Still, the legends persisted. Over time, the reputation of Lucrezia Borgia became almost fictional, shaped by later writers who cared more for drama than accuracy. During the Romantic era of the 18th and 19th centuries, authors revived and embellished the old stories, crafting Lucrezia into a seductive villainess. Painters depicted her with poison rings and mysterious smiles. Poets described her as a femme fatale whose influence corrupted even the highest priests. These portrayals were far removed from reality, but they helped cement the myths in European memory. What began as political propaganda in the late 15th century had transformed into cultural legend. Meanwhile, back in Ferrara, Lucrezia's final years revealed a woman far from these sensational images. By 1512, her influence in the duchy had reached its peak. She participated in decisions regarding taxation, trade, and diplomacy. She managed estates with precision. She organized charitable initiatives and oversaw the upbringing of her children. Letters from the Este court show that she had become indispensable. Her husband Alfonso, once skeptical, entrusted her with responsibilities normally reserved for high-ranking nobles or male advisors. Her transformation was so profound that many in Ferrara believed she had redeemed the Borgia name entirely within their region. Yet beneath her outward strength, Lucrezia grappled with increasing emotional and physical hardship. The deaths of children, the pressures of leadership, and the lingering memories of Rome weighed heavily on her. She sought solace in religion, often visiting convents and corresponding with spiritual counselors. Her interest in literature deepened, especially works related to morality, philosophy, and faith. Despite the myths that depicted her as a figure of vice, her writings reveal a woman concerned with ethics, duty, and family. Her final pregnancy in ** 1005 proved fatal. After giving birth to a daughter, Lucrezia developed complications, likely from infection, a common danger in childbirth during that era. Her condition worsened rapidly. Letters from the Este court describe Alfonso grieving beside her, distraught and unwilling to accept her decline. Priests performed last rites. Courtiers prayed outside her chambers. The woman who had once been the center of political storms, whose name had filled Europe with rumor and scandal, now lay quietly in her bed at the age of 39, exhausted from a lifetime of loss and reinvention. Lucrezia Borgia died on ** 24 June 1005, 119 * in Ferrara. She was buried with honor in the convent of Corpus Domini, where her tomb remains today. The nuns who recorded her passing described her as gentle, charitable, and devout. They made no mention of the scandals that had pursued her throughout her youth. To those who lived alongside her, she was a model duchess, a figure of stability, and a woman who overcame hardship with dignity. Yet after her death, the legends did not fade. If anything, they grew stronger. Writers who never met her continued spreading tales of immorality. Artists depicted her as a seductress. Historians relying on enemy sources repeated the old propaganda without examining its origins. For centuries, the myth overshadowed the truth. Only in the modern era, with access to unbiased archives, letters, and records, have historians begun to restore her true identity. Today, Lucrezia Borgia is understood as a woman shaped by the violent politics of Renaissance Italy, not the villainess she was made out to be. She was used as a pawn by her father and brother, exploited by propaganda, and targeted by rival families who sought to destroy the Borgia legacy. Yet she rose above these challenges, rebuilt her life, and became one of the most respected duchesses of her time. Her reputation as a corrupter of the Vatican tells us more about the political climate of her era than about her character. It reflects the ruthless strategies used by powerful families, the weight of gossip, and the fragile position of noble women in a male-dominated world. Her true legacy is found not in the myths, but in the lasting impact she had on Ferrara. Under her guidance, the city became a vibrant cultural center, fostering literature, music, and art that shaped the Italian Renaissance. She proved that dignity could survive slander, that leadership could overcome rumor, and that a woman's worth could transcend the stories men told about her. Lucrezia Borgia entered history as a scandal. She left it as a legacy of resilience,